Hello and welcome to Just One Q, the podcast where we explore the latest ideas in workplace belonging in conversation with thought leaders and experts. Each episode, a guest and I dive into a question that highlights their area of expertise. And the goal is to leave you with tools and insights you can use to make your workplace better and more human-friendly. I'm your host, Dominique Attrell. I'm an inclusion educator and advocate working for Dialectic, an inclusive workplace learning consultancy in lovely Guelph, Ontario, which is situated on the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional lands of the Chinoochtan and Haudenosaunee peoples. This month, we mark a century since the birth of Black History commemorations. In 1926, Carter G. Woodson, known as the father of Black history in America, launched Negro History Week, which celebrated African American history, culture, and achievements in schools and communities. This evolved into the Black History Month observed today in the United States, Canada, the UK, and Ireland. At the time, Woodson wrote pioneering social histories chronicling the lives of Black people, essentially putting them front and center at a time when white scholars and society denied that African Americans were worthy of consideration. So in this episode, we're going to be looking back a little bit at that history and also taking stock of the state of workplace DEI here and now in 2026, where visibility is still an important challenge. And we're going to talk about what kind of strategies we can use to support inclusion and continue anti-racism work in our current climate. So the main question that's guiding us today is, can we integrate DEI without becoming invisible? My guest today for this conversation is Dean Delpeache. For the last decade, Dean has been focused on talent management and creating frameworks of equity for organizations. Through his consultancy, Stracity, he helps organizations design strategic frameworks focused on diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity, or DIBE. Dean's background is in HR. He has a master's in human resource management from York University and a certificate in leadership and inclusion from Centennial College. He is completing his PhD in human resource management from York University. And in addition to his work with Stracity, Dean is a professor and program lead of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Workplace program at George Brown College in Toronto, and is a global conference speaker delivering talks and workshops to both students and industry professionals. His passion for talent and DEIB have led him to become a vocal advocate for creating equitable workplaces. Dean, welcome back to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. I'm so excited. It's been quite a little while, and so I'm super excited to be back.
Yeah, and just for our listeners, Dean was here, but it wasn't recently. I think it was 2021 the last time you were on, and you spoke at the time to Dr. Melissa Horn, who was my predecessor in the host chair. So I'm glad to have a chance to talk with you myself and glad to reconnect in this way.
Absolutely. Great to chat with you.
So let's dive in. I would love for you to just start by giving us an idea of what it is that you're doing at Stracity and the specific lens that you bring to organizational culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Stracity stands for strategic diversity. And the work that Stracity does is to help support companies on their journey to strengthen inclusion within their workplace, to see a strengthened culture, better productivity, and performance. And how Stracity does that is the organization walks alongside companies by developing a strategy. And that strategy comes through looking at various elements of whether it's engagement through surveys, focus groups, having direct conversations and understanding where an organization is. And then Stracity builds out systems around the talent lifecycle to really support companies to integrate inclusion and be intentional about strengthening that inclusion within an organization. And then I think the other side of that as well is Stracity helps to support companies with awareness, education through workshops, training, and then coaching and consulting and a host of other things. But the main goal overall for the organization is to really help companies strengthen inclusion, to build culture, to build performance and productivity over time.
Awesome. And you are basically launching a new education initiative in conjunction with the 100th year of Black History Month. Would you tell us a little bit about that and maybe what sets this work apart from the other things that you've done in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. So my role in the organization is a director, principal consultant, board member. And so the team decided to put together to commemorate the 100th year of Black History Month, which you so eloquently spoke about in your intro, to really look at how we can look at stories over the centuries of the history of Black people in North America and apply those stories to the workplace and really, really highlight how those stories, number one, model inclusion, number two, promote behaviors that speak to strengthening inclusion, and then number three, allyship and advocacy. The one thing I really like about the workshops that are going to be done is that it's not necessarily just focused on highlighting Black prominent individuals that many people may be aware of, but it's actually looking at the work that Black individuals as well as white individuals during that time had worked together to see those principles happen. You think about, Dominic, like the Underground Railroad. That Underground Railroad and transporting Black individuals who were slaves to Upper Canada, or Canada as we call it now, that didn't happen with just Black people working by themselves in a silo. That happened with people who felt the need together, which were white and Black. And so we really want to highlight those stories and share that in celebrating this 100th year of Black history.
Yeah, that's such an interesting take. And like when I think of Black history, I do think solely of the stories of Black excellence, I guess. That has been the flavor of the event for such a long time. And what I'm hearing you say is that you're wanting to bring those stories to light because they highlight advocacy behaviors. And there's an application there that's really important. Can you tell us, is there a specific need or context that you're responding to with this work? Are companies asking for something different to commemorate this 100th year anniversary, or is it different than maybe things they were asking for 5 years ago?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you asked that question. The truth is that we are living in a very interesting time, especially around these concepts of diversity and inclusion. And there's a lot of geopolitical rhetoric, social rhetoric around making, if I can use the term, diversity inclusion go away, right? But I think a lot of that is because, number one, a lack of understanding of what it is. And I think at the same time, too, it's also because people may think that by highlighting these terms, they're excluding other individuals. Well, the truth is the word diversity means the unique characteristics that make us all up as individuals. So it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what race, ethnicity, every single person, right, has characteristics and element of diversity. And so looking at it from that perspective, we want to ensure that this year people understand like it's not about a focus on one group. It's actually looking at highlighting, yes, the achievements of a group, but in the context of how everyone was involved in that achievement. And I think that is really, really the key because people need to recognize like when we talk about Black history, it doesn't mean that we can't reflect on others who were part of strengthening that history. A lot of times we've looked at it in this, it's just focused on this one demographic. But Dominic, no, not at all. I think of things like this. There are people that I know that don't look like me that have been champions and advocates of ensuring that everyone has what I call equitable access. And so because of that, we want to make sure we highlight those stories. And I think it's really important to do this year.
I'm curious about like, do you know yet how this is received, or have you seen interest in this? Like, are people talking positively about broadening the focus, or is there any kind of protective pushback about like, we have to focus on Black achievement because it's Black History Month? I think of it as how we're wired to think about the event as like extremely Black focused. And is everybody on board with that, or are you seeing different perspectives?
I think there's three perspectives, if I'm honest. I think there's always going to be a group of individuals that, nope, it must be this way. I think there's a group of individuals who are like, based on the current climate from an organizational perspective, it's good to maybe see a little bit of broadening, but we still want you to highlight that Black excellence. And then I think there's a group that really and truly, they don't really they're here nor there, right? And it's more about presenting to them the information and having them absorb it in a way that is palatable to them. So I think there's always going to be different groups and different camps, but the organization has taken the direction to focus this year. And we examine, once the sessions are done, how did people receive those sessions? Were they actually impactful? Because we still, to your point earlier, are going to highlight Black excellence, but we're also going to celebrate the fact that there are other individuals who took place to ensure that Black people had a voice in society today.
Just that advocacy piece being presented alongside the stories of success. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if I'm in a leadership or HR or education role in my organization, what should I know about the 100th year of Black History Month? What specific opportunities does it offer for highlighting or creating belonging in my workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's really, really interesting. When I think about the person that we consider what I would call the founder of Negro History Week, Dr. Carter Woodson, he said a lot of different quotes, but there's one that I really, really, really like, right? Which he says, those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teaching of biography and history. And I think one of the things that we want to ensure that we highlight from an applicable sense is that integration has always been what every practitioner wants to see happen in the workplace when it comes to strengthening inclusion. We want to ensure that programs have equitable access and that it becomes almost normalized. But the quote that I read from Dr. Woodson still remains to highlight that there has to be a degree of intentionality, and there always has to be an intentional push. I think about sales organizations, right? I think every organization who has a product or a service that they want to be sold, they wish that the engine just revved all the time and it would always be selling and you'd have year-over-year growth without even doing anything.
Yeah.
But the truth is every organization still has to be intentional about making sure they push their product, their service, that it's unique, etc. Right? I think in every degree of every aspect of a department within an organization, there still has to be a degree of intentionality to ensure that we're continuing the work. And I think that's what I would want HR leadership or executives or learning and development individuals and organizations to know, is that having sessions like this, it continues to keep not just awareness, but that degree of intentionality on the work and the focus on the work in the organization.
Yeah. And this is a great opportunity to do that. You have something on the calendar that's recognizable, celebratable, people can get excited about. You can use it as an opportunity to bring that back into your organization if it's been dormant for a while or if the conversation hasn't been happening. I can imagine this is a really potent opportunity. I see that. We love a centennial, right?
Of course.
Yeah,
I love it.
Exciting.
Yeah.
I want to dig in a little bit more about the state of DEI. In 2020, we were sort of at the peak of the wave. We saw a lot of open dialogue. We saw public rebukes. We saw calls to action. It was the peak. It was like that high time in DEI. And today, the rhetoric has definitely softened, to put it politely. So in general, how are workplaces adjusting to this broader social change? What are you seeing?
Yeah. I've been on a lot of calls. I've been in quite a bit of scenarios over the last year where I've had the opportunities to hear from organizations. And I think there's really three camps. Again, there's the camp number one where people were sincerely committed to this work. And what you find is pre-2020, they were already committed to this work.
Yeah.
It just amplified it more for them. There's the camp that got on board during that 2020 season and either they've decided to continue or they've kind of said, we're going to fall off now. And then there's the camp that really never got on board anyway. So it didn't really matter. So you can kind of have those three camps. What I've noticed with the camp that is committed and with the camp that jumped on board and is still trying to keep the work going is that depending on if they're a multinational organization, let's say with head offices in the US, right?
Sure.
What you'll find is there is still the desire to do the work, but they may not be shouting from the rooftops like they did in the past, right? If you find that you have an organization where they may not be US based, right? But maybe they do work in the US. You'll see that same thing where they're not shouting from the rooftops, but there's still organizations that, let's say they're not based in the United States, that are still vocal, maybe even vocal in social media. But again, it's just not to the heightened extent as it was because of, I think, a social outcry during the time of 2020. So ultimately, all to say, Dominic, I think there are people still doing the work and there are people still wanting the work to proceed. They're just not shouting loud like they used to. And here's the truth of that, if you don't want me saying, this is not something that hasn't been the normal cycle of history, right? And in the 1950s, right, prior to the rising up of the civil rights movement to end segregation in schools and workplaces, it's the same thing that we saw in the past. But there's something I want to quickly highlight with that, though. There's one thing that I have noticed throughout time is that it's not just one group always rising up. I remember this one picture of the civil rights movement that I saw, and people was holding up signs that say, "Let's end segregation." If you look at the picture, you will see people from all different races, all different backgrounds, genders, and colors right in that picture trying to raise that up. And so all to say, I think this is just a part of the cycle of history. And do I know what is next in the cycle? I can't predict that. But what I do know, though, is that what 2020 did do for us is create more awareness in companies say we still need to do this work. So I think this is an interesting time, but we move forward and committed to it.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about like 2020 as sort of a high watermark. And we're in this stage still where it's recent enough that we are comparing ourselves to that all the time. But I like the way you've zoomed out and given us a flavor of the cyclical nature of this. It helps, I think, to zoom out is to take heart in this.
Yeah.
Because you can see that you're not only witnessing a downslope, you're witnessing a cycle. And I think that's a really powerful viewpoint. So thank you for sharing that.
And maybe just one more thing, Dominic, and this is just for anybody who's a student of this work. I think you said something so valuable that is something we should highlight. You should zoom out and look at the periods of when you had the high watermark, right? What caused that high watermark? What happened in the downslope? What caused the next high watermark? It gives you perspective on how you can foresee what might be the next, high watermark. And, the truth is this could be another podcast. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's a good point you made.
Yeah. So something that we've talked about prior to this conversation is a framework that you tend to use to help us think about DEI in this sort of softer time, like in that little downslope. And you use the 3 I's. So I would love to turn it over to you and have you just give us at first just like a high level overview of what are the 3 I's and very briefly how they work. And then I want to break them down and go into each one in a bit more detail. But if you would kick us off with just the introduction to that framework that you use.
Yeah, absolutely. So the 3 I's is really these 3 words. It's intentionality, it's integration, and then it is understanding what it means and looks like to be invisible. And if I was to break them down, we talked a little bit about it. Intentionality, it's that ongoing deliberate commitment to really advance this work, to strengthen inclusion and really create equitable access for others. And it's really just ensuring that we are bringing awareness to our organizations around how to make those conscious choices to, mitigate and reduce bias, to ensure that we have accountability and that sustained effort around the work. And that's what we think about when we think about intentionality. When we think about integration, we want to see that intentional effort integrated into all of what I call our people or talent life cycle systems in an organization. So whether it's hiring all the way to workplace exits, we want to ensure that there is equitable access and opportunity throughout all of that talent life cycle. And then it is the reflection on ensuring, right, that the risk to the work we do is what I call seeing that work become invisible. right? Where the efforts that we're making, although they're integrated, we don't want them to fade into the background, right? So that's why it's always important in kind of that circle of the eyes to ensure that we're always remaining intentional and that we are supporting organizations in a way where people can actively practice this so that it does not remain invisible and it's just a part of our day-to-day life. And so that's the 3I concept that I like to refer to really help organizations during this time.
Yeah, the integration piece is really interesting. And I think that is kind of very reflective of what we're seeing a lot of right now, like the push integration, and there are different motivations behind that, it seems. When you say integration, so what I'm hearing from clients all the time is we are still committed to diversity and inclusion. We're just not funding it as a separate line item anymore. We are integrating it into our processes and policies. We don't have staff that is specifically in charge of diversity and inclusion. Is that what you mean by it? And could you give maybe some positive and negative examples of what that looks like in organizations?
So integration, when we really think about it, is, okay, let's take a learning and development portion of a talent lifecycle, right? Companies want to ensure that their employees are developed and educated, particularly key talent, so that that talent continues to add value into which strengthens their performance and productivity as a company. And over time, in a for-profit, it would add shareholder value. In a not-for-profit, it helps to continue to build strategy and raise funds, etc. So you look at your whole leadership development training, and you have to ask yourself, number one, is there inclusion principles embedded in that training, or do we have a training that reflects modeling inclusive behavior? Because that's all a part of the performance cycle. That's integration, right? We want it to be integrated into our education system, right? Now, the reality is you can have a learning and development specialist manage that integration. So when you use the terminology of, do we need a specific individual to do this work? It's the learning and development person who's specializing in doing it. But what you need, though, is because the learning and development specialist may not necessarily be an educated diversity and inclusion person. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. What 2020 did was it raised the profile of many passionate people who were not educated. But there are people in this space that have actually gone through educational programs who are specialists in this work, right? Here's how we can compare it to another department. Think about payroll, right? Sure. There are people who help to ensure that people are paid, but those payroll people are not compensation specialists. There are actually people designated to understand how compensation works, how grade levels work, so that people are compensated at the right level. It is the exact same thing. There are specialists in this work who are experts who actually can go and make sure that content for the learning development specialist is the right content, it's current, it's updated, etc. That's where you make it intentional. Right? So hopefully that helps to give people a little bit of a view of integration is, integrated into your programs. That learning and development specialist might manage it. Intentionality is make sure you have a diversity inclusion overlay, an umbrella to ensure that that expertise in that work is current and it's ongoing continuously.
Right. So integration can be a positive thing. It isn't always a thinly veiled rollback, but we have to have the intentionality piece alongside it in order to there's like a tension there between those two eyes. Am I getting it?
I don't want to necessarily call it tension because you want a collaboration between the two. Okay. If I could use that. But I think the key is that because you asked me for like a negative example, I think where it becomes negative, right, is when we think and place the ownership on that learning development specialist to say, well, you should be educated in all topics and you should know everything. And so you should have the expertise to roll out programs that help us all the time. I mean, it sounds good in theory, but it's not necessarily correct, right? Because as I use that compensation example, you can't expect that learning and development person to be a compensation specialist who understands the nuances of compensation, how to train on that. No. So where the positive side, if I can use that, comes in, and not necessarily I mean, I don't view it as tension. I view it more as collaboration and partnership, where the partnership comes in is having that expertise on staff, or at least from a consulting point of view, to make sure that the education is current and reflects the principles that people need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you give us more examples of what to look for in terms of evidence of intention? Like when you step into a role with a new client, for example, what are sort of the tells that they're very intentional with this work rather than just hiding behind a veil of integration?
Dominic, I love that question. It's a really good question. I will give you a great example. The first question I always would want to know is, do you have somebody in your organization focused on this work? That is the first question. Can I give you why I would ask that question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if a company is serious about selling, and the first question I'd ask is, do you have salespeople? Do you have a chief salesperson, right? A chief revenue officer? Because that tells you that you're serious about selling, right? Now, mind you, right? You have a company that's under 20 people. Everybody's wearing hats to do the work, but I'm talking about as organizations increase, right? In their staff. That's the first thing I'm going to ask, right? So I think that number one tells you if a company is intentional about the work, right? Now, let's say, for example, they don't have the budget currently to hire someone. Call it a small organization like we just talked about. Then my next question would be is, do you have individuals within the organization who have formed some form of committee to try to integrate this work? Now, that could be positive and negative, because what you typically might do is you get a group of individuals who are passionate but don't have education. So that's where I say you need to bring in somebody, right? Whether it's a consultant or someone to help guide those individuals, right, through that. But still, I would ask the question, who in the organization is doing the work, really, at the end of the day? And that shows whether individuals are intentional. If a company's like, it's all a part of our job, I'd say, yeah, I know it is. Like, sales is a part of my job, even though I work in finance. But what we still need someone in that role. So I think that really shows to me the intentionality. Who is accountable to do this work?
Yeah, it's so easy for that to fall through the cracks. I recently designed something for planners, the profession of planning, and how to make planning workplaces more equitable and more accessible and inviting to a broader range of candidates, for example. And there are like all these initiatives that have to be done in order for that to, and it touches every facet of the organization. And something that I get people to do is take that little card that has like what we've talked about and match it with who in your organization is supposed to be doing that. And it's like chaos breaks loose because people don't always know, like people know the work needs to be done, but there isn't necessarily an organized effort to make sure that somebody is holding that task. And then it's like, if you have churn in your organization, that's difficult too, because it's like somebody might have been doing it off the side of their desk and then they leave, or they're replaced, or they change roles, and you have these gaps that nobody fills. So there's not like a strategic kind of approach to this necessarily. It tends to sort of be ad hoc in some places. Planners are not really like that. Planners are good. They're big plan, and that's what they do, and they tend to be strategic. But I can imagine in a lot of workplaces, that's a much bigger challenge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the invisible part now, because I want to know, like, what does invisible DEI look like, and why is it dangerous for Black employees and other groups?
Yeah. So invisible DEI really, at the end of the day, is when a company or an organization makes the choice, because that's what it is at the end of the day, to say, maybe in the boardroom, yes, it's important, but let's not talk about it at all. And I think that's what it is. It's not about just companies who are just not doing anything. It's more about the organizations that say, yeah, no, we want to support all of our employees, and we think inclusion's great. And, yeah, we want to make sure we have a diverse organization, but let's not do anything at all. Right. And let's hope, right? And I think these are key words that I'm using. Let's hope that people get it. And I think that is the risk that companies are taking, especially in this season, right? I think there is that group of companies, like I mentioned in the three pools, that are thinking, look, we set up programs, we're okay. They're just going to roll along. We don't need to say anything else anymore. Let's just keep it going. But it's, again, I kind of refer back to different departments, right? Most companies who are serious about selling products, they will always have quarterly sales kickoffs. Right.
Sure.
Or departments will get together every quarter to reflect and review what they did. You need to look at it from that perspective, right? There has to be a form of accountability, because if we just say, you know what, our products are just going to sell, don't worry about it. Who cares? Let's never talk about selling, right? I mean, yeah, you might sell some products, right? But you could probably sell more products if everybody's excited about it. Yeah. And I think that is what organizations need to be mindful of, that we can't just hope this into existence. We have to work this into existence, because it's work. It's a discipline. Yeah. So that's what I mean by invisible, and in terms of the context of this conversation.
And I know you're really big on modeled inclusion as a way for leaders to kind of prevent that invisibility. So there's like those structural elements that we already talked about, and making sure that there's accountability. And then there's actually like seeing your leaders do stuff. Could you tell us maybe 2 or 3 behaviors that you wish that leaders would exhibit to show that they are holding the line on inclusion, or that that work is made visible in their organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. I ascribe to Deloitte's inclusive leadership model. There are several, but under Deloitte's, there are 6 characteristics: commitment, courage, cognizance of bias, curiosity, cultural intelligence, and collaboration. Those are the 6. One of them I would highlight is curiosity, particularly in the context of Black History Month, right? So, for example, one way that a leader, right, can model an example is through curiosity. As opposed to saying, hey, I'm going to attend this Black History Month celebration, think about how you could actually understand the plight and experiences of Black individuals. And one way you can do that is by literally picking up a book and reading a book to understand, right? And let's say a leader decides, I'm going to pick up a book and I'm going to read this book. And then in one of their team meetings in February, they open up that meeting by having what's called an inclusion moment. And that leader says, hey, before we start this meeting, I just want to recognize that we're in a period of history that's like none other. And this month typically is dedicating to celebrate Black individuals and their contributions in our society, which I think is a positive thing. And one of the things that I did for myself as a leader is I decided this year, I want to learn more about the plight and experiences and the historical context that Black individuals have gone through. So I read this book, right? The Book of Negroes. And in reading this book, I learned one thing that was really, really important, that resilience helps to overcome various situations. And I want us to know that as a team, we're not going to be perfect. But if we can hold on to resilience in our day-to-day work, I think we can make our team and this workplace a better place for all of us. Thanks for letting me share. Let's go on and move towards talking about our agenda. Just think about that, though, Dominic, what I just did. I didn't just say Black History Month is important. I talked about what I did to ensure that for me, this was important and valuable. That's what we mean by modeling, right? It's not just talking the talk. It's actually talking, walking, and creating action and sharing that with others. So was there anything I said that was discriminatory in my speech? No. Was there anything that was excluding anybody? No. Just said what I did. Yeah. And so I think that is, in effect, where all of our leaders need to get to, right? And there are countless stories over the year for different demographics and segments that you can highlight and talk about to really strengthen your team and that organization overall.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you make it seem so easy, but it really ought to be rolling off of our tongues. And especially in this moment, there is like this specific opportunity. I think like what you've done is just highlighted exactly how to tie Black History Month and the centennial of Black History Month to a tangible action that leaders can take to make DEI work less invisible, or to sort of model inclusion in their organizations, which is, yeah, it's simple, it's powerful. And thank you for actually scripting it for us. That is really useful. And I can tell you're an educator because it's replicable. We can all do that now. And I want to thank you for that. Also, thank you so much, Dean, just for your continued dedication to this work and for being here today to talk with me about it. It's been a really fruitful conversation. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dominic, I want to thank you and Dialectic and this Just One podcast, because the truth is that you've given people like myself the platform to continue to share and help bring awareness and potentially educate individuals. And so I want to commend the work that you do and say thank you to you as well.
Thank you so much for saying so. That means a lot. And if our listeners feel the same way, feel free to share the podcast around, like it, leave a review. We love to get the podcast into more ears and messages like Dean's, certainly to spread far and wide. So if you're curious about Dean and his work at Stracity, also please check him out on LinkedIn, and you can go to stracity.com. That's STRASITY. And you can follow links in the show notes. Also, please reach out to me if you'd like to be a featured guest on the podcast, or if you'd like to nominate somebody else to be a guest. I really love having these conversations with L&D, HR, DEI professionals who are passionate about their message, or with folks in far-flung adjacent fields who have something to teach us in these people and culture or learning roles. Really looking for that cross-pollination piece as well. So there's nobody that shouldn't be considered, honestly. Thank you so much again, Dean, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm Dominique Cottrell. Thanks for listening. See you next time on Just One Q.